Hi, my name is Pastor Russell Mullenberg, and this is Eat This Word, a weekly program where I serve up bite-sized bits of Bible. The Bible verse we're going to look at today is a foundational passage, one of the earliest passages in Scripture, and it's really foundational to the way the Bible sees us as people and our relationship with God. It's Genesis 1, 26 and 27. Here's what it says. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." And so God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. So this is just a foundational passage for how the Bible views us as human beings. Right there at the very beginning, the crowning act of God's creation. It talks about mankind being made in the image of God, the likeness of God. So there's a Latin phrase that can be used to describe this. It's imago Dei, that the image of God, humans are created in the image of God. And so I want to talk this week and next about this passage and what this means. So two things that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about how this is a position of great privilege, that we are only humans in all of God's creation are said to be in God's image and likeness. So we're going to talk about that. And then next week, we're going to talk about how this is a position of responsibility. That by creating us in his image, God has set us in a special place in the order of creation. And that's a great responsibility that we have. So let's talk about this position of privilege. About 5 things that I want to show you, kind of lines of thought that point to this idea that humanity is the crown jewel of God's creation. We go to the verse and we see it says, "Then God said," and that sort of reminds us that this is a verse that's in an order, in a sequence of events. And so this is a reminder that the creation of humanity, this is the final act of creation. On the 6th day of creation, there have been 5 days plus the morning of the 6th day, describing God's acts of creation and all leading up to the creation of mankind. I had a theology professor who said that it's like those first 5.5 days are God creating a nest, a home fit for mankind to step in. It's like dressing the stage, and now mankind is going to walk out onto the stage, take center stage in God's act of creation. We're reminded, too, that right after this, God rests. By the 7th day, God had finished the work he'd been doing. So on the 7th day, he rested from all of his work. Again, once he'd created humankind, he'd reached the end of his creative work. He'd reached the goal to which he was moving things. Third kind of line of reasoning here that this is humanity is different than the rest of creation is when God kind of introduces the idea that he's going to create humankind. He says this phrase, "Let us make." Every other time, every act of creation, God just says, "Let there be. Let there be light. Let there be sun and moon in the skies. Let there be animals." But when he gets to humankind, now he stops, and it's like he stops in the counsel of God. This is actually a Trinitarian verse that sort of reminds us that God exists as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. It's not just God by himself, but God in the mystery of the Trinity. God counsels with himself, and he makes this decision now that he's going to make mankind different, that this is special. And so God gets more personally involved. So here's the 4th thing to think about. In chapter 2, we get this more detailed account of the creation of man and woman, whereas chapter 1 is day by day by day. Chapter 2 is sort of a focusing in on what happened on that 6th day, where God forms the man from the dust of the ground, where God gets intimately involved like a potter forming the clay, or we jump ahead to the creation of Eve, of the woman, and again you see God getting involved, taking the man's rib and forming Eve, the woman, from it. And so there's this idea that when God gets to the creation of mankind, he of course he's directly involved. He's the source of all of creation. But when he gets to the creation of humankind, he gets his hands dirty, as it were. He steps in and he forms us from the dust of the earth. He breathes the breath of life into us. And so again, an indication of how humans are different from the rest of creation. And the fifth thought here, we can go back, that God, when he's done, he says it's very good. Every other day as he creates, he says it's good. It was morning and evening the first day, and it was good. It was morning and evening the second day, and it was good. But when God gets to the end of the sixth day, after creating humankind, he stops and he says it's very good. It's very good. He delights in this creation, the humankind he's created. So we go back to our key verse here, and I've highlighted the word image. God determines to create humankind in the image of God, in his image. Doesn't mean we look physically like God. Nobody knows what God looks like physically, but that there's something about us that is meant to reflect God. I read that the Hebrew word for image is also the root word for the Hebrew word for shadow. So just like our shadows follow behind us and do whatever we do, in that same way, we're supposed to shadow God, and our attitudes and our thoughts and our values are meant to be an imitation of what God is and what God is like. So humans really are the crown jewel of God's creation. We are put in this position of privilege as only humans out of everything God made that can be said to be made in the image and likeness of the Father. So real quick, a couple of implications for that. One of the implications means we need to value all human life. Every human life is valuable to God. Every human life is made in the image of God. And so death of any kind is something, as people in God's image, we should resist and we should fight against. So war and genocide and abortion and euthanasia and anything that treats human life as though it were disposable or cheap should be resisted by those of us who recognize our special place in creation. Right after Noah and the ark, and as Noah and his sons emerged from the ark, God, in Genesis chapter 9, he says this to them: "Whoever sheds human blood, by humans shall their blood be shed, for in the image of God has he made mankind." One of the implications of being made in the image of God, this is a death penalty verse, and you can debate when it's appropriate for government to exercise the death penalty, but it reminds us of how much God values human life. If we treat human life cheaply, then our own human life should be disposable, or not, should be forfeit. That's what he's saying. If you treat another human life as though it were disposable, then your human life will be disposable. And again, we can talk about just application of that, but we see how important and how seriously God takes this position we have as being made in his image. And then the second thought here is that we need to treat all people with great dignity. It's not just enough that we fight for the life of every human life and preserve it, but the human beings that we interact with need to be treated with great respect, great dignity. And that includes human beings maybe that we don't agree with. That includes human beings who maybe have a different worldview than we do, or a different religion. Even those who follow a different God, still all human life needs to be treated with dignity and respect. Great C.S. Lewis, in a sermon called The Weight of Glory, is a somewhat famous quote of his. He says this: "It is a serious thing to live in a society of possible gods and goddesses. To remember that the dullest and most uninteresting person you talk to may one day be a creature which, if you saw it now, you would be strongly tempted to worship, or else a horror and a corruption such as you now meet, if at all, only in a nightmare." He says, all day long we are in some degree helping each other to one or other of these destinations. It is in the light of these overwhelming possibilities that we should conduct all of our dealings with one another, all our friendships, all our loves, all our play, all of our politics. There are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal. It is immortals whom we joke with and work with, marry, snub, and exploit. Immortal horrors or everlasting splendors. Next to the Blessed Sacrament itself, your neighbor is the holiest object presented to your senses. So we need to remember that as we move through our day and as we encounter the driver who's slow in front of us on the street, and we see a political viewpoint we disagree with on Facebook, and even just as we get into a minor disagreement with our spouse, we need to remember every person we interact with. Every person is no ordinary person. They're not mortals. They are not mere mortals. They are immortals, made in the image of God. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, if it helped you in some way to know God better, you can really help us out and help more people to see it by sharing it, by liking it on Facebook. You can also go to our website, eatthisword.com, to learn more about the ministry that we are trying to create content like this online and elsewhere. And also, if you'd be inclined and we could use a little financial support so more videos like these can be made, you can visit patreon.com, eatthisword, for information about how you could be a regular supporter.